let's do our showdown. All cryptos versus BSV. Let's see who wins. And we're going to combine them all together, so it's a fair fight. So when I say all, we're going to combine them. We're not going to say we just have to pick one that wins. We're going to say if you have all of them, which is better, to have all the rest of the cryptos or not to have any of them and only to have BSV. So you have to pick between which one would be better. Only having BSV and nothing else, or having everything else and not BSV. Let's see which one's actually better. So by all, I mean not just in theory, because in theory would be you could create another Genesis block. In theory, it could include basically another copy of BSV. But by all, I mean like essentially what's known out there, what exists. So car models that are not theoretical models, but existing models, like the Honda Civic exists, so we can include it. But if we make up a theoretical future car, we can't include that because it's not what we're talking about here. So you could have another thing that's like a Tesla, but it's just named something different, but it's essentially the same thing. Okay, so the point is, if we were talking about Tesla versus the rest, Tesla versus Ford and, you know, all the rest of them, Mitsubishi and all these other things, and see which one would you rather have. So I made a video recently. Let's see if there's anyone watching yet. Oh, there's 2 people watching. Okay. I made a video recently where people were saying that I'm wasting their time because I asked, show me one thing about CASPA that BSV does not have, and the comments were, oh, you can just Google it. Oh, you can just ask ChatGPT. Oh, you're wrong, you can just Google it. Oh, you're wrong, you can just ask ChatGPT. And I did, and I still couldn't find anything. So I guess they must be using a different ChatGPT or a different Google, because I still couldn't find anything that I would consider something that counts. So CASPA, we're going to say DAG or fast blocks. Well, we can't count that because zeroconf. Okay. So what's zeroconf? Well, zeroconf is basically anyone's ability to essentially ask a few different nodes whether they've seen a specific transaction, or to update them on an address so they can basically get information about a transaction and whether it's a double spend. And that takes around, we'll say 50 milliseconds. Okay, and because of that, we don't care about 10-minute blocks. 10-minute blocks are good. Okay, so we don't need these. We don't need DAG blocks. We don't need fast blocks. What we need is fast double spend checks. We need fast transactions being sent from node to node. Okay, so that's my airport versus, it's basically the same argument that I use for why BSV is useful and BTC is not. It's because the small blockers, essentially small blockers reject the wisdom or the understanding of how the double spend checking algorithm works. So that's also the reason why we have BTC. Okay, same. Okay. let's talk about Monero. Now, I used to think that Monero was better because I thought that it's good to magically have free trade by having secret transactions. And it was basically wrong because money laundering, I listened to a video where Craig kind of explains it and I sort of agree with him, but basically money laundering in the way I would describe it is like a sliding scale. It's not just, you're either doing something that's illegal or 100% not illegal. It's more of like, where's the value being distributed in any given situation? So something might be legal, but it might not be what a company wants to do with investing their money because, well, whether it's the government or a company, you sort of want to know where your money's going because you don't want somebody to represent and say, hey, I got a good contract over here instead of this other one. You go with it, but they're actually pocketing some of that, okay? So totalitarianism, money laundering, and I don't want to say crime, but basically untraceable events. So high value events that aren't traceable, you're not actually using proper money because you're not keeping real exposable contracts. Now, there's privacy versus secrecy. Okay. You have serial number on your dollar bill. Okay. Privacy is when I hand you a dollar bill and the government doesn't see it. Your friends don't see it. Your mom and dad doesn't see it. The company you work for, the company the other person's working for doesn't see it. The only people that know the dollar bill is being handed off is the person handing the dollar bill over and the person receiving the dollar bill, and whoever else they allow to be watching. So if they want to do it in front of a camera, if they want to do it in front of the other people, the presence of others, they can still hand off a dollar bill in secret, okay? But that's a private transaction. Why? Because it's private versus a secret transaction because the dollar bill has a serial number on it, so it still has a form of traceability, which serial numbers for dollar bills are not necessarily only for the sake of making sure that somebody doesn't just copy dollars, right? Because if you just copy a dollar, right, then anyone can print money. So if you have serial numbers, at least you can check and be like, hey, why are there $2 with the same serial number, right? So, but there's also the aspect of crime, because murdering someone could be worth $1 billion to someone else in their company. And if they can just murder someone for free or for a very cheap price, then they're basically doing the same sort of thing. They're not necessarily copying money or printing money, but they're basically committing crimes that basically let them steal value for free. So it's the same as like if you hold a gun to someone's head and you say, hey, give me all your Bitcoin or I'm going to pull the trigger, right? And then you have these other people that at the same time, they know that that could happen, but at the same time they say, not your keys, not your Bitcoin. So it's just like, okay, so if it is your keys, it is your Bitcoin. So what happens if somebody holds a gun to my head, says, transfer me the Bitcoin, and so when I transfer it, then legally, it's theirs now. The person who held the gun to my head did nothing wrong. They legally, lawfully get to keep the Bitcoin. Nobody has to go after them. No police has to stop them or anything like that. They can just keep it, and it's rightfully theirs because they're the ones who possess the key, right? So that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense for real money usage. That's not free trade. That's like anarchy, right? Free trade is when you have voluntary agreements, as like Ayn Rand would explain. You have voluntary trade where I agree to trade with you, you agree to trade with me, but we don't trade if we don't agree on the trade. So let's see who's watching. So we got 8 people watching. So, what am I teaching, sir? I'm explaining why so what I'm doing is that I'm explaining we're doing a final showdown. Why BSV beats all other cryptos, and it's not just each crypto individually, it's all other cryptos combined. So if you had to decide whether you could use all cryptos except BSV or just BSV but nothing else, why BSV would still win that fight. It would still beat the battle. So you could use BTC, you can use Monero, you can use Cardano and all that other stuff, and BSV will still basically be like, it's better to use BSV and forget all the other stuff, right? So that's basically what I'm doing right now. So right now, what I've done is it's essentially explained why Caspa is completely useless. BTC is completely useless. Monero is essentially bad, is going to be my argument. Useless would be sort of an indirect term, because yes, technically you can do something with Monero that you can't do with BSV, but that something is essentially, it's in the grand scheme of things, it's essentially useless because you don't really get a good result from the secrecy. It's actually considered a feature. You don't have to listen to Craig Wright if you don't want to, okay? But one thing that he'll claim, which I'm going to explain why I agree with it, is that the traceability aspect of BSV is a feature. It's not a bug. It's not a bug. The blockstream text. It's not a bug to have traceability. It's not a shortcoming of original Bitcoin. It's not like the original Bitcoin was designed, but it wasn't good enough. It wasn't that smart. It wasn't that sophisticated. That's a false narrative that I sort of actually fell for, I think, for like decades, because I didn't really know much about all this. I didn't work with any code with actual cryptos. I just knew algorithms. And that's sort of the narrative that I've sort of bought into. I thought, oh yeah, Bitcoin was just the first version. You don't have to, it doesn't matter. We don't need it anymore. I think I would tell people that we don't need it anymore. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter who created it. We just use Cardano and let's keep moving on. The problem is that I had no real comprehension of what was actually going on with the lies being told and what was actually being purposely blinded on people's eyes to get them to not understand what was actually already in place. So original Bitcoin had original opcodes. It was Turing complete, so we didn't need Ethereum. It had all these things. It had traceability on purpose, because it's like when you hand $1 to someone, okay, has a serial number on it, and it's not just to make sure you're not printing more money, but it's also to show that they're not doing, like, for example, a crime or money laundering and things like that with it. So let me strap this puppy over here so that he doesn't interfere with my video. There. Steady puppy. Or I'm going to have to put him outside, one or the other. So if he starts barking, I'm probably going to have to put him outside. So when you hand somebody $1, it's a private transaction, but it's not exactly secret because that $1 has a serial number on it. In theory, okay, if you think about this, in theory, and this gets more complicated, but the simple example is the ATM that you got the $1 out of could know the serial number, have it written down, saved somewhere, and then the person you give it to could go put it into another deposit of some sort, reverse ATM, we'll just call it reverse ATM, and that machine will basically track the serial number as well, and then the two machines essentially can coincide, like take that information together, and in theory they could also release it publicly and things like that, but essentially they can basically determine that in some way you gave that $1 to that other person, basically is what's happening. So yes, the government and nobody else watched you hand it over to them. Now there's a traceable path. Alright, so we got a puppy that's barking. I'm going to have to put him outside. Come on. Let's go outside. Alright. Let's go outside. You want to go outside too? Okay, so traceability is essentially, so zero conf is for CASPA and I would say BTC as well. Traceability that might be an A, I'm not sure. Somebody tell me how do you spell traceability. Why I always try to put an I there. So we have, let's see, Ethereum and Cardano. Okay, I'm just going to put ADA. Why do we not need those? Because gas is stupid. Okay. Sorry for the Tesla pun, no intention. Nodes make blocks, right? Nodes, you have to understand, a node just produces a block. They're not required to send anybody a specific transaction. They're not required to send transactions to each other. Nobody requires anything of nodes, they're just incentivized. Okay, so they're going to do whatever they're incentivized to do. If they're not incentivized to do it and you try to force them to do it, then you're playing a different game. Okay, and you're playing communism. You're not playing free market. So nodes make blocks, and when they do the other stuff, you have to ask whether they're incentivized to do the other stuff or not. Because you want incentive, otherwise you're not going to have services that you can pay for using Bitcoin, therefore you're not going to have utility. So this is also no utility for BTC, because why? You already have Visa and MasterCard. So why would you want something 10,000 times less efficient when you have something that's 10,000 times more efficient with the same supply? And now BSV is given the same supply, it's cheaper. So yes, you could make 1,000 like forks, but why consider the one with the highest market price as the winning one? Why not consider the one with the highest utility as the winning one? So you still have potential for the price for that to go up because of that, but that's a different story. I'll still argue that even if the price stays the same, what's important is can you make money from it? Because we're thinking about long term. You still want to make money from it even if the price stays the same. So if it provides utility and low transaction price value, then it's going to be the thing, and therefore because of that, market follows utility. Eventually, then BSV's price will go higher than everything else. So don't talk about BSV's price needing to go higher first, because that's like the cart before the horse. Okay, first you got to make sure your horse is good, and then when it's healthy and good, then it can follow some carts with it. Okay, so why do we not need Ethereum, Cardano? Well, because opcodes, so version 0.1 opcodes work fine. Turing completeness is updating transactions separately. Okay, so the blockchain, the nodes don't run the code for you. You run the code, but you're able to keep updating state. Okay, so no limit on how many times state may be updated. Max. Okay? There's no limit. You can keep updating state forever. So BSV is Turing complete in the way that you need it to be Turing complete. It's like a big memory storage. Okay? You don't need it to run the CPU. Okay? You run the CPU on it. You can inscribe into the transactions, as long as the opcodes allow for you to make rules that depend on each other, you can make your quote-unquote smart contract like things. You can put into the rules, into the opcodes themselves, the description of what's meant to go down, and you can then update on that. So the nodes will, they will check just like transactions. They have to follow what the opcodes say, but the opcodes are deterministic. They're going to run, and then they're going to stop, and then they're going to say, okay, if you want to do more, you can pay for more transactions. You can pay to update more state. Okay, you don't need this gas garbage, because what happens then with that? Then you're paying nodes to like run these programs, and then you have to pay gas fees for it. Okay, it works, but in theory, like, yeah, you can try to do things like that. Are they incentivized to do it? Do they really, are they all running it? How does that work? Because that's like a lot of computation. What if one runs it and then the other one that's validating it just says, oh yeah, that's true, hint, hint, well, maybe. Like, is there a is there a cryptographic way to prove that you validated something? Or are you just pretending that you validated something and then you're incentivized to just hope that it's correct enough where you care enough, right? So as long as the opcodes are simple, there's incentive to check everything where you don't have to cryptographically prove that everything's matched, because it's trivial to check up, to go through and verify a transaction or verify a deterministic opcode. So transaction verifying things, which I could call nodes, okay, we're assuming that you can decouple the mining. I'm not going to get it too technical, but these verifying nodes could be like, they're not going to throw things out. They're going to say, like, it's trivial. It only takes a few steps to check this. Okay, I checked it and we're good. Okay, so who's actually getting paid to run all the code? That's the thing about Ethereum ADA. I don't know if they make any sense. And we don't have to talk about proof of stake or whatever. So, because proof of work is an anti-spam. That goes back to BTC with the no utility. Proof of work works as long as it's less work for the result instead of more work for the result. BTCers have it backwards. They think that it should cost more to do transactions. It should cost more to put things on chain. It should cost more to do everything. And that's a lie. It's the opposite. It should cost less. And that's the only reason why proof of work makes sense, is because it doesn't actually cost a lot of mining. When you grow the number of transactions you can validate, the proof of work doesn't need to grow with that. It just needs to grow to compete with the other nodes as to who's going to get their block. So it's going to be, they're going to invest as an investment. If you're running a node, you don't want it to be like 90% to 10%. Because you don't want to basically be so good at mining where you're spending all this energy mining that you can't even keep up with storing all the data. You can't keep up with verifying all these transactions. So, and if that's decoupled, then furthermore, you don't even need to worry about mining at that point, because you can make money from all your data storage and your network connections. You can verify all the transactions quickly. And then you can partially complete a block, and you can leave it to where there's one transaction left, and you can say, hey, I'm leaving this much money. I'm just going to throw it out there, and all these other mining machines that are heating people's homes can just finish it and say, okay, cool, I'm fine with that. I'm gonna finish that block, and there you go. So it's just a way to distribute the blocks so that all nodes are treated equally. You can't have like somebody who's in charge, somebody who's not in charge. That's the point. So, yep. Now we got Caspa, BTC, Monero, Ethereum. We got XRP. Somebody said XRP is the next big thing. Okay. XRP. Somebody said it's the first time they caught one of my lives. It's also the first time I've ever posted. Okay, so we got XRP. Now, somebody explain to me what XRP's problem is, because I might have to research that. I don't know enough about XRP just to pinpoint things. Let's see here. I'm not going to talk about pre-mining because that doesn't actually prove anything that I'm talking about, I don't think. Looks like they say the transaction model is account-based instead of UTXO. So that's weird. Sounds like it's like very permissioned and things like that. Centralized influence. So fees are fractions of a cent. So XRP is for like banks. So it's not, is it not permissionless? I'm not sure. So if it's permissioned, then maybe we could say that's the reason why you wouldn't want to go with it. Because then it's under another influence. It's not fully free trade, because you could have some government that says, hey, you're allowed to do this, but you're not allowed to do that. And it's not sort of decoupled from, BSV is decoupled. So decoupled, let's talk about that. Okay, like gold, right? Gold is like decoupled from what governments are doing, right? It's just a metal, right? It doesn't have an opinion on who's allowed to hand it to someone else or anything like that, right? It's a metal, so it can work as a commodity. Okay. So I guess that would be what I would be talking about as far as like decoupled control. Not to be confused with BSV's ability to potentially in the future, you don't see it now yet, but in the future BSV should have decoupled mining and transaction verifying. They should be two different things. So you have transaction verifying, basically data storage centers, and that should be decoupled from the actual mining facilities. And there's a good reason for that. And it also will allow the market to really expand, because you won't need all these like mining machines also to have all the high bandwidth connection. They're two completely separated things. You could be mining, you're not sending transactions or verifying anything, but you could be nonce checking using like a home heater, kind of like what they're doing with BTC right now. But it would actually be useful for BSV because even though you're not verifying transactions and things like that, what you're doing is helping complete a block. You're helping basically do a nonce check. So they're basically going to put information out there, and they're going to say, hey, to do the anti-spam, we also need to do the nonce check because, you know, we want the rest of the world to look at the block and think, hey, is this legit? So there still needs to be that proof of work aspect, but there's no reason why it has to be that expensive. There's no reason why it has to keep going up exponentially in the amount of energy intake. But if we're already using the energy to heat our homes or something like that, they're going to start using those routes to do that. They're going to start doing that. And the fact that it's decoupled makes it more efficient, not less efficient. Because now they don't have to worry about using inefficient mining rigs that are burning, oils in a particular facility to do that. They can just partially complete a block and say, hey, we're going to get paid for this if everyone mines it, and all the miners are going to be, all the nonce checkers are essentially not going to care who produced the block. They're going to be like, I don't care. I'm going to make money either way. So whether it came from this facility or this other facility or whoever, they all said they completed a block. So I'm going to try to complete one of these 10 blocks, and whatever one I find, I'm going to get paid for that. So, they're not going to care. So it's actually going to be a good thing, because that means these facilities don't have to compete ferociously with each other. It's just going to be the nonce checkers competing with each other. And so it's either going to be worth the energy or it's not going to be worth the energy. It has nothing to do with how fast your transactions are going to be sent from one facility to another, which is nice. That's going to be a nice thing. You just have a market out there. You just put it out there and say, hey, if you solve this, I'll make money and you might make money too. But here it is, you know. So that's different from this decoupling. Decoupled control. I don't know. It just sounds like somebody could make an argument for why you don't want information. Sounds obvious, but I don't want to say that it's obvious because you never want to make that mistake. You never want to say, oh, it's obvious that this, because that's exactly what the BTCers did when they said, we don't want centralized control, so we need small blocks, okay? That, they said it was obvious, but you need to actually prove things. If you learn anything from math, doing actual upper level math, upper level computer science stuff, and you're actually solving real problems, okay, and you're being, you don't want to claim things that are to be obvious, which you can't explain in like 2 sentences, okay? You might be able to explain it in 2 sentences, but I'm not gonna claim to. So I've kind of explained these things because I've thought about them. This thing, someone might be able to argue that it's bad to have a permissioned system, but it's not always necessarily bad for a permissioned system to exist. It's just that it probably won't fulfill the role that BSV would be playing, basically, in a sense, because a lot of times there is an argument to say that free trade should ultimately be, should have a little more power behind the scenes than somebody trying to control and manipulate things and try to say, hey, this is one example of why is, you have all these people that decide they want BTC better, but we can prove using math and using logic that BSV is actually better, but that doesn't mean the majority is going to go with that. So how does your voting actually work? Well, you can also prove using the evidence, you can allow the logic to carry itself out. And so free trade is sort of an Ayn Rand philosophy thing. Maybe XRP can be, I would say maybe it's useful for specific situations if they can think of them, but I don't think that you can replace a non-permissioned system with a permissioned system, because there would be like a central authority basically, and that would kind of defeat what some people would say is the purpose of it. So we can maybe debate that further, and some people will just tell you straight up XRP is just a straight scam. So Gavin might be right about that, but I'd rather, I don't want to say anything that I don't know how to explain correctly. So we got the discussion started, so I said it was the final showdown, so I should be able to tear that up, but it's kind of funny that these ones, which were supposedly good, I'm already explaining why they're not, but they're very just technical reasons. They're basically showing that, hey, you didn't comprehend what you're doing. When you see someone saying, trying to build an electric car that then tries to charge itself, it's like, whoops. It's not an argument against electric cars. It's just showing that they designed the thing. Whatever they're building, they made a mistake. They forgot some law of thermodynamics there. You know what I mean? So, and that's sort of what's happening with like, I would say BTC and Caspa, and sort of Ethereum. That's sort of what they did. Is they sort of built this weird thing that it's like an electric car that then tries to charge itself, because they don't get the fundamental technical basics of what's going on. I don't know of anything like that for XRP right now that I can't, because I'm not an expert on it, where it's like that. But the permission thing seems like it's a red flag. Let me look at the comments and see if you guys say anything else. XRP is permissionless. Okay. Is there an aspect to it that's permissioned, or? Let me check. So I'm asking ChatGPT because I just want to know it's saying that it's not fully permissionless. So they're saying it's semi-permissioned. Whatever that means. So anyone can transact apparently is, okay, so it's saying that anyone can transact and anyone can run a node. But then there's the influence of consensus, and consensus being algorithmic apparently are permissioned aspects of it. Okay, so, okay, fair. So that's sort of reminding me of like how people were saying that BSV is a scam and all this stuff, and then they're trying to say that like somebody controls it or whatever. So Craig Wright controls it or something. And he said, well, I do dictate. Like he didn't shy away from the fact that he's like, oh yeah, I 100% dictated exactly what the protocol was, and there was nobody who could vote on it, nobody could give their opinion on it, nothing. It was all just either you go my way or you go the highway. That's it, right? But that's how DNA works too, right? So DNA, right? So that's how a protocol works. So protocol DNA, think about it like DNA, okay? You have, or programming language, right? You have to decide on your programming language, or you have to decide on the 4 base pairs of your DNA, how those are going to work. You set those in stone. Nobody can change them. Nobody has an opinion. Nobody votes on them. No creatures evolve into having more of a different programming language, a different. Okay, they all have just it's either you use this or nothing works. And then you can build on that, and then you can have all these genetics, or you can have all these programs that you can write. Okay, so he was pretty clear, and that's basically how the thing is defined. Is there's a version of the protocol that stays the same forever. Nobody changes it. Nobody votes on it. But then what you can do with it is actually very creative. What you can build with it is versatile and Turing complete and all these things. So it's designed on purpose to be that way. And you can see how it works. You can see that it verifies the history, that the nodes are governed by a certain consensus system, that nobody's judging, he's not deciding who can do transactions and things like that. Okay, it's nothing like that. It's just how the protocol works, and that's actually a good thing in a way, because if you can prove that it won't change, then you know that you can't fudge it to be where it is centrally controlled some way, basically. Because if you could change it, then in theory you could start doing all those other things and manipulating things and start getting approval from a certain key or whatever to do something. And you can't do that if the protocol is meant to stay the same. So I think in that sense it makes sense. XRP though, do they have the ability to change it in the future? You know, I don't know. I don't know how that works. I'll have to look into it more. But they said that, it says on ChatGPT, it says XRPs, at least the transactions in running nodes, are permissionless. So I'll have to give that to them. But I will have to study more on it to give it a fair chance, fighting chance. Cryptocurrencies is greater than crypto company. Any company involved in crypto will eventually lead to its fall. That's what made BTC so great. Okay, so I just want to point out something that I've been saying in my other videos. I'm not sure if you guys all watch my other videos or not, but I did point out, and I said this to I sort of was like explaining to a friend about it, and I said, why are you gonna like, it's like you have this African American boy like this Michael, I was gonna say Michael Jackson, Michael Jordan, who's still say 4 years old or something like that, and you say, hey, I thought he had good genes. I thought he was good. It wasn't going to grow up to be a really great basketball player. He can't hold a ball for anything, because he's still still a little boy, okay. he still has to grow up. And so these people are saying, well, it's been forever, it's been decades. What do you mean? Well, you have to understand the time scale thing. That's why I said I don't want to assume anything, including time scales. So some people will automatically assume that's too long of a time scale. You can't have 20 years go by. That's not allowed. It's just not allowed. If 20 years go by, then you failed, right? But we can't say that. Okay, so what I'm going to bring in is another time scale argument. Okay, so I'm going to bring in another argument, which is number of services on chain, because there is a service that's been posting on BSV consistently, and it's like a cloud. What is it called? I should actually look it up, so I don't want to. I'm not here to make things up, right? I'm here to actually know what I'm talking about. I forget the names of things. So, in the latest block, okay, let's see. Record cloud, REKORD, KLOUD, record cloud. Okay, this is part of my argument that I have to make because I want to actually tell you guys the actual company name. This has been consistently been posting on chain. So what does their service do? Probably takes SHA-256 hashes of things, documents, just to timestamp and prove, hey, I invented this, I had this PDF at this time, now it's on chain, but I'm going to pay somebody to put it on chain instead of me writing the hash myself, okay? They're more advanced than just copying and pasting a hash and an up return, okay? So, Record Cloud is one company, right? So imagine if you have like 1 and then 1,000, okay? Oh, I don't care about companies, I only care about cryptocurrencies, okay? I care because microservices is where you get the utility from it, right? If you already have Visa and MasterCard, then all you have is a pyramid scheme anyway. All right, I knew that before I knew about BSV. I already said crypto.com is essentially like a scam, quote unquote, because if they don't let you send your BTC to whatever address you want and you have to sell it through them, then what's the point? I could make anything. I could make a company called the Do Nothing, We're Lazy C Corp. Buy our stocks because the price of the stocks will keep going up. Okay, that's already in place. Stock market already defines that. So if we have, let's do it like this. Okay, so what am I doing? Let me do this. Let's say right now is 2025. This is 2009, and this is 45 or something. Okay. You have maybe one company. You used to have 0 companies that were actually using the blockchain for something that nothing else could do. Now you have maybe one company. Okay, but the point is, what's going to happen if that grows? And you get 2, and then it keeps doubling. You get eventually, in like a couple decades, you have 1,000 different companies, 10,000 different, just like you have different logistical trucking companies after the engine was invented. Okay, we have tens of thousands of trucking companies. Okay, what's going to happen when you have thousands of tracing companies that are using QR codes and things like that all over the place? Okay, now you have society, logistical systems, warehouses, things like that being built, just like they're building all these big databases, centers, AI infrastructure right now. What's going to happen when you have 10,000 companies that are all posting things on chain, using the transactions with their low fees? What is BSV then? Okay, what's BTC going to be for them then? Are they going to care about think about it. Like nobody's going to be using it to get stuff done. but they're going to be using BSV. What do you think the price is? What's going to happen to the price then? What's going to happen to, what are the miners going to want to be mining? Okay, what's the demand going to be like for the hash rate and all that stuff when you have 1,000 companies? So if we're just at one company that's consistently posting things on chain, there's other companies using it, but they're not as consistent. Okay, so what's that going to look like? I'm going to read the comments here. All right, so we have greed is the reason. It's the human feature. No centralized authority makes crypto so cool. As soon as you introduce features, it gets destroyed. Okay, but see, if you're talking about BTC introducing features, okay, I don't want to get into it. I already have a whole video about this, like, that I made over a year ago, I think, where I explained the difference between, like, decentralization and distribution. You have to understand the double spend checking algorithm is a real thing that Bitcoin actually uses. So if you have a mesh network, okay, if you're just, like, if you buy internet in your house, they'll tell you, you can hook up these nodes anywhere you want, and they form a mesh, and then you have internet connection everywhere in your house, okay? The reason why you have to buy that and install it in your house, and why we can't just do that everywhere where each house has its own mesh node, is because then the internet would get clogged. That's why you need these bigger hubs. Same with electricity. Okay, that's why we have these bigger and bigger hubs. That's why we have airport terminals. Instead, everybody has, imagine if every single house in the world had to have their own airport landing strip. Or, to make it even worse, because that's possible, but here's something that's impossible, okay? Imagine now that you have to make a phone call as an airplane pilot, and you have to call grandma and ask her, hey, I need to figure out what to do. But you don't just have to ask your grandma. Actually, it's more complicated than that. Your grandma now has to literally contact at least 50% of all the residential homes in the world. So all these little homes that are up in Saskatchewan in the mountains and things like that, she has to make phone calls. And if she doesn't make all the phone calls herself, she has to convince other people to make the phone calls, to where they have to reach at least 50% of all the residential homes in the entire planet to agree, like, oh yeah, you can turn left 5 degrees on your airplane. Not only does she have to do that for your airplane before she can call you back, but she has to do that for all the airplanes all the time, live and continuously all the time, without stopping. And all the airplanes need a response within a few seconds, sometimes a few minutes. Okay, and there might be 10,000 airplanes out there. Okay, so does that make sense? No, it doesn't make any sense. That's why BTC doesn't scale. That's why it's 1,000, 10,000. It's like comparing a Honda Civic to a car, and I did the math. Okay, it's not 10,000. It's not 100. You have to put 10 million gallons of gasoline, not 1 million, but 10 million. But you know, I was trying to figure out the scales here, but this is what I ended up with. It wasn't a smaller. It wasn't. My point is, it wasn't 100,000. I'm not making some random number up. It was. My estimation was it was 10 million gallons of gasoline into one car for the car to be able to just go 1 mile versus a Honda Civic. So that's the ratio of efficiency. So a Honda Civic versus 10 million gallons of gasoline for your car to be able to go 1 mile, okay? And that was basically the efficiency of already performing, not like theoretical, well, I'm trying to remember now how I did this because I don't want to say anything that's not true. I used some sort of data. I want to say it was shown data, but it could have been some theoretical data, basically about BSV's transactions per second and cost. It might have been the actual cost, the average cost that was going on versus BTCs. So you can do the math for yourself and see, but there's a reason why they're different prices. It's not just because BTC is getting a higher price because it's better to just invest in. No, it's because it's less efficient in how it actually works. And you want efficiency because efficiency doesn't mean This is where Michael Saylor basically lies to everyone. He says the more hash power, the stronger it is. So if it's more energy than all the U.S. Navy, it's more secure. That is wrong, okay? Because anti-spam is not the same as a full SHA-256 hash. It's not the same as an ECDSA signature. It is just an anti-spam measure, and it's composed of two components, not one. So it's not just more hash power means more secure anti-spam, and less hash power means less secure anti-spam. It's actually a multiplication. It's a compounding effect. If you have more edges, you're more secure, and if you have more hash power, you're more secure, and both of those combined. So if you have less edges, you're actually less secure, and you need more hash power to have the same amount of security. Hash power costs money, but edges, once they're established, they're just internet connections. So they don't cost direct money. Yeah, it costs money to connect yourself to another node more efficiently, or to make a larger data center and things like that. But once it's there, it's not a direct cost. Hash power is a direct cost. This costs this much energy essentially to do it. So unless you know how to reverse, SHA-256 to get the zero, I want to say zeros at the front, but it's technically is the hash less than a certain number, and that will look like how many zeros are at the front, but it's not exactly that. It's whether it's less than a certain number. So point is, more edges makes it more efficient, meaning you get the security for less hash power. You see what I mean? So when they say more hash power is better, it's nuanced because you actually want more. If you can get a higher security to hash power ratio, that's better than just having more hash power in the long run. If you can get exponentially more security for how much hash power it takes, well, now you're starting to understand why BSV, it's never really Sybil attacked. It's never really attacked. Like, it's actually more secure, I would say, than BTC, because BTC, even with the high hash power, if you spread out a bunch of double spends all over the place, I mean, there's so many things you could do to attack the network. Whereas BSV, it's like these airport terminals that have like high bandwidth connections to like practically every other airport terminal on the planet. You're not going to be able to spam them because they already have these established secure connections and high bandwidth connections to nodes which they trust. So when you come in with this different information that you spam them with, they're going to be like, they're going to know there's something's up. Whereas with BTC, you got so many nodes, they don't know who to trust. They're just like, okay, I'm just going to go with whatever I see first. But then they're going to disagree so that they can do the consensus, but then they're going to have so many different transactions being accepted and blocks being made where they just have to say, well, I saw this transaction first, but I'll go with this block because they mined a block technically. So we're just going with that one. And so they have no way to do the zero conf. You see, that's why you have to wait the 10 minutes for the blocks, because yes, once you start building blocks, then you can depend on it, but then now no one can use it for transactions because no one can trust it what nodes say, because the nodes will say, yeah, I saw this transaction, but doesn't mean anything because it could be in a block or it might not be in a block, So however you go about it, when you say efficiency, I only mean positive. I don't mean like negative, you know what I mean? I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean it in a strictly positive way. Like, you want security, yes, but hash power is it's a two-way street. It's like, you want your network to have a decent hash power to show that it's healthy, but you don't want the cost of hash power. It costs something, right? So if you can reduce that cost and still get the same effect, that's actually a good thing, not a bad thing. It's not saying like less hash, like it's saying more security divided by hash power, a more security to hash power ratio. So anything that costs something, you have to use a little more wisdom, a little more nuance to understand it. You can't just say that's just a purely good thing and there's nothing bad about it. Security, you can say that because you want it to be a secure network for it to function, but you don't want to just say more hash power no matter what. At what cost? What's the trade-off, basically? So we got Record Cloud. If you imagine 10,000 companies using BSV to trace things, now they're going to be dependent on it because they're going to be like, hey, this is working. Nodes are actually going to get paid with fees. So until you get to the point where the fee is more than the block reward, which I'm not going to say whether that will happen for BTC or not. I mean, if enough people want to pay high fees to transact on it all the time, I guess, but it doesn't seem sustainable. It doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. But if you can have microtransactions, like small little transactions doing useful things, and those fees, without needing to depend on a whole bunch of investors, are actually higher than the block reward at some point, then you have what I would call is a truly governing and sustainable network, because it actually proves that it's economically sustaining itself. It's actually proving that it's actually able to survive off its own utility, not just it's like an investment profit, like, hey, you invested in Amazon, so therefore we're quote unquote profitable, but Amazon making so much money from all their deliveries that they become rich from that. They can pay off all their debts, and they can sustain themselves from that. That's where BSV would really show its power. So I guess XRP could still potentially do that, maybe, but I still don't know enough about it to know whether, I mean, would you depend on it? Because it sounds like if it can be updated or changed or something like that. I'm not sure. Like, if I wanted to start a business that was going to use the logistical systems, it would be nice to just have something that doesn't change ever for the base protocol. So I could just use BSV, and now when I run my business for 40 years, we're using these QR code scanners. They're always going to work on the same system no matter what. I can run a BSV node. I don't care what the rest of the world is doing. I can just keep, the way my node works is the way it works, and whether it can compete or not is a different story, but it's going to make sure that my transactions are getting certified on a original protocol chain, and it'll just do that. And if somebody tries to make another chain with a different thing, then they can, but I'm gonna have the private key, so it's not like somebody can double spend. Like, if you have a scanner machine, this is why people, like, they talk about 51% attacks. It's like, but unless they have a private key, they can't just make things up. Like, you can control nodes in theory and tell the nodes, hey, you have to join my club where we're going to secretly control the world. But they still can't fake a full shock, unless they can fake a full SHA-256 hash, not a partial one, but a full one, to try to change actual blockchain history, try to deceive on what the actual blockchain history was. And they can break, like, ECDSA signatures, right? They can somehow have the same effect as having your private key. They can't just make up a double spend. They can't just say, oh yeah, because I'm a node, I'm going to claim that this wallet double spent over here and here. No, because the spend itself is a cryptographic signature, right? So nodes can't even make that thing unless they have a key. They have to double spend with their own key. They can't, if you put a private key in like a QR code scanning device or something like that, unless you take that private key out, that device is going to work however you designed it to work, and it's not going to be producing double spends and things like that anyway. So you can track that in your database and run your own BSV node. Whether it's efficient or not won't matter, because you're using it as a backup. It's just like a database to back up your information. So Record Cloud is only one company. If you have 10,000 companies, now we got something to compete with as XRP, I guess. So, all right, somebody give me some other. Ripple is the technology, XRP is the coin, and all pre-mined. Have a look to my last few messages. Please, would love your take on it. I wish I could. And I don't know if I can say that Ripple is well, I'll say this. I don't know if Ripple, like the XRP coins, could be considered a commodity. The same way that like BSV coins could. Like, literally, even the US dollar, well, I'm not going to get into the difference between US Treasury notes and Federal Reserve notes, and the reason why your dollar has a black seal on the left and a green seal on the right Somebody made a video about that, explaining that, and that's pretty crazy if that's true, because that means they basically have to deceive anyone into paying taxes, because anyone basically could just make the claim that, oh no, I don't want to use this as a Federal Reserve note, I want to claim it as a US Treasury note, and therefore they don't pay taxes on it, I guess. So because I guess they convinced one of the presidents to remove all the US Treasury notes from circulation, and the Federal Reserve notes were actually originally claimed, I guess, to be. This is how they deceived everyone. Is they made it seem like it was a note that was only meant to be used at the high level banks, but then they made everyone use them, and so that's how they're able to like tax everyone or something like that. It's basically a deep-seated conspiracy. The thing about conspiracies is, whether they're true or not, you can't really break math. Like, you can't change how math actually works. So when you have a commodity, right, when you have gold or rice bags, you can't fake a rice bag. They're not securities fraud. Oh, this rice bag, the government deleted this rice bag and they decided to give you 100. No, they have to go in there and actually take the rice bag out, confiscate it, and like hand it to someone else. You know what I mean? So when you have goods that have serial numbers like that are fungible, that's the definition of a commodity. And you have Bitcoin, the original at least, BSV, that actually functions as a digital commodity, literally as a digital commodity by definition, not just by somebody's opinion or some law that somebody, like, nobody can go and make a law to try to make something a commodity. Because you can make a law about gold if you want. It's not going to change that gold sits there as a metal and acts as a metal is what it does, is my point. So the way Bitcoin works is the same thing. You can make any laws that you want, but ultimately the way it actually functions, if you're running the original protocol, the way it functions is essentially what you would call a digital commodity. And so that's important, because that's part of the aspect of how things get established, like how law works and things like that. So yeah, so if somebody broke SHA-256 or ECDSA suddenly just got broken, then maybe that would just fall apart, right? So it's standing on a couple legs, but you could also say, hey, somebody could make I had a friend who was saying all computers could get shut down with the correct electric shock wave, the correct EMP, which shut everything down, including calculators. So I was trying to tell him, but you can still pay Bitcoin from one device to another. Even if you don't connect to the nodes, you can still do a partially finalized payment. It doesn't check for a double spend, but it still can actually pay in an environment where you're just in the community and you're just paying each other and things like that. Because double spends are actually way harder to get away with frauding someone than most people would actually explain. It would basically be impossible, but I'm not going to get into that. But Bitcoin would still work in a small community in theory, it should be able to work for a long period of time. And then if you update with the chain later, it can just append all that into some blocks, and everyone's paid because they're just updating the chain of signatures. So you should be able to do that in theory. You should be able to have like an off-grid community that only every once in a while ever connects to the internet. But I asked my friend, what if the EMP was strong enough that wouldn't your brain shut down and you die because your brain is electrical, right? Oh, well, it's different. Well, then what's the definition of electrical? Because how do you make a device, right, that can withstand this EMP and things like that? So gold, right? What if somebody vaporizes? This literally happened where the government went and they confiscated literally all the gold in our country from everyone. They said oh, you have to give us all your gold. Just think how ridiculous. Is it the United States? Hold on a second. Do I live in the United States of America? I was just double checking. That sounds crazy to me. How do you go and literally go to the entire country and confiscate 100% of all the gold everywhere? Is that what happened? somebody like look into that, because I thought something like that happened, but it sounds, to me, that sounds crazy. Again, you still have to hand it to them. You could still hide gold in the ground. I mean, they're not going to find all the gold, but it's a commodity, right? So they could try to confiscate your Bitcoin some way, somehow, by forcing you to do it. But unless they have the private keys, they can't just magically make it disappear. With US dollars, you can do that. Because US dollars, you can say, they could even say this dollar is legit, this one's not legit, based on the serial numbers we decide. We decide to block your bank account. We decide to start this bank account. We decide to print this magical money in digital form without printing the dollars. Okay? So that sounds more like a security. Doesn't sound like it's a commodity, because commodity doesn't have a base provable value. So as long as you stand on the legs of ECDSA and all these things, sort of the three legs of anti-spam, ECDSA, and SHA-256 history. And by anti-spam, I mean like a sustainably, maybe you could call it a mature network, but an economically self-sustaining network that's going to last. BSV could be a digital commodity. You can actually prove it. So it's not like even the US dollar, where you pretend to like treat it like it's a commodity when it's not. You can basically prove that it's not, but I don't like when you have things that you don't know that you can't prove. I'm not sure if my messages are end-to-end encrypted or not. I can't prove it though, but I could prove it if I was using something other than iPhone or whatever, if I use my own protocol, like I could prove it, but they're not proving to me, when they should be, that is actually end-to-end. They're just claiming that it is. Okay, but they're the ones sending the public key. So it's like, hint, hint, what's actually going on? It's kind of creepy. It's kind of weird. But that's how some things are. They get you to all use it, and you don't know what's actually going on behind the scenes. What I like about this is, if you examine SHA-256, yes, the NSA created it, but again, you can't override mathematics itself. Math is always true. So in SHA-256, you can basically show, you can't really prove, but you can basically show why it doesn't make sense. There's a lot of statistical proofs too, because of, like, for example, if somebody knew how to produce two files that have the same SHA-256 hash, then they could be publicly broadcasted, and then everyone on the planet could be like, hey, look, this is weird. We have two different files that somebody found, and both of them have the same, when you take SHA-256 hash of them, they both get the same result, right? So that's publicly available, and yet nobody has released that. Nobody's found it. Like, somebody find me one. Find me two files, okay? I'll send you $100. If you can find me two strings or two files where if you take the SHA-256 hash of each of them, it's the same result. It's the same hash. I'll send you some, I'll pay you for that if you can find me any two. It doesn't matter where you found it or anything. Just find me two that give you the same, the same result. I'm gonna bet you money you can't find it. Okay, but you can also, you probably bet $1 trillion on that, or a few trillion, I guess. So, not that even doing that, well, anyway, it's more complicated than just whether two files have the same hash. There's other things involved with the security of a hash algorithm. But the point is, yes, the NSA created it, but just because they created it doesn't mean that they control it. Same with what I used to say about Bitcoin. And I had a friend who told me they control it. And I'm like, they can't control it. And I was partially correct, but I didn't know that with all the scam stuff with BTC with the small blocks, is what they've done was they've taken something and they allowed there to be like technically an uncontrollable part of it, but they slowed it down from being like the Rio Grande River to be essentially like a trickle of, like, when you turn on a faucet and it's dripping. So when you do that, like, the Rio Grande is a lot of water. So that's a lot of freedom. But if you're like, let's technically let them have quote unquote freedom, but let's turn the dial down until there's like no freedom left. That matters. Or enough freedom where it's so little that we can essentially just control them anyway. Because it doesn't matter what they do on this tiny blockchain. We can control them either way because they can't do anything useful with it. So I'm going to check the comments one more time and then we'll be done, I think. Oh, brother, just remember me when it eventually does. No, the core XRP ledger is public permissionless blockchain, meaning anyone can use it to send transactions. However, specific applications and financial institutions can as well. The same with Cardano will happen to Caspa. Comparing Cardano to Caspa is a joke. XRP is permissionless. Yes, somebody said that. The real newspaper is watching. All right. BSV Godfather. Ripple is the technology. Okay. So this has been a learning experience for me because I basically learned that I should learn a little bit more about XRP, but I want to better explain why XRP, if it's, I want to, well, we'll give it its fair shot. We'll just put it that way. So we got XRP versus BSV. And if XRP, if they're trying to use it to get everyone to do cheap transactions, well, maybe they're using it to try to figure out a way to control everyone so they don't use BSV and they're not actually technically free anymore. Because if XRP, so somebody has to tell me, is XRP a commodity? Okay. Okay. Now, I want you to use the real definition. Don't just ask ChatGPT and just always go with what ChatGPT says. Is it actually a commodity according to the fact that you can have a fungible serialized coin and that it's... So you need to ask Craig and ask Satoshi, which his YouTube is BSV Bitcoin, by the way. And Craig on X is CS Tominaga, I think. Okay. And I'm not saying we're going to ask them and then just go with whatever they say. I'm going to say we're going to ask them, but we're going to see if they can actually prove their point. Okay? So we're going to ask them, is it a commodity? If it's not, can you prove it? Can you explain why it's not a commodity? And we'll see. We'll have to go from there. I know Gavin Mail recently, I think that's one thing that he said after the conferences. He said that XRP is a scam, basically. So, yeah, I guess that's it. I wanted to debate some people, and Caspa is, I'm not sure. Oh, one thing I want to mention, there's also ICP. Okay, internet computer. Okay, I know it's kind of complicated and everything, but what's the deal with that? Do we need an internet computer? What's the point? Do we need it? Is it gonna compete with BSV? Is it gonna give us something? Is it gonna grow more and have more utility and all this stuff? or is it also useless? And I know Craig has already answered something about that. He's already said that I think that it's a joke or something, but I think he's also talked about XRP too. But at least I got these bases covered, I think. So I said gas is stupid. But all right, guys. I think that's it for this thing. If we want to talk about ICP and XRP later, when I'm more of an expert on those, then I guess I can. Somebody said ICP is used on MetaNet Ninja along with BSV. All right. I'm gonna let you guys go, and if you want me to talk about ICP or XRP next time, please harass me in the comments, and I'll talk to you guys later.